They were not hiding in the forest. They were building a town under the clay. And when county men finally found the entrance in the summer of 1856, 4 came back shaking, 3 were dead before autumn, and the people they had gone looking for were gone. Not captured, not identified, gone. The case I want to walk through tonight is known, in the scattered record that survives, as Red Hollow. The first written mention of it appears in 1848, in the notebook of a Methodist circuit rider named Nathaniel Boone. He described hearing, from farmers in the hill country east of Centerville, rumors of a colored refuge beneath the red earth, where smoke leaves no chimney, and footsteps vanish by morning. That alone would be enough to file the story under frontier folklore. But Red Hollow does not stay there. A county land survey from 1851, preserved only as a damaged copy in a probate file, marks an area of broken clay ridges and sink country, with a note so strange it still unsettles historians who have seen the facsimile. The notation reads, "Ground irregular, air drafts from unseen openings, signs of habitation uncertain." The original page disappeared sometime after the Civil War. What we know about Red Hollow comes from fragments. A rain-swollen ledger recovered from Boone's effects in 1862, partial agricultural schedules from 1850, showing an unexplained drop in labor counts on 2 neighboring properties, a private letter written by a surveyor who never completed his route, and oral accounts collected decades later from black families, whose elders spoke of a place below the clay where people built their own night and kept it lit. According to the most consistent version of the story, Red Hollow began in 1839 with a man named Isaiah Reed. Reed had escaped from a kiln yard attached to an iron operation in western Georgia. In the surviving descriptions, he is not remembered first as a preacher or a fighter, but as a man who understood soil, heat, weight, and failure. He had spent years around brick molds, firing pits, retaining walls, and collapsed trenches. He knew what earth did when it dried too fast, when it drank too much rain, when it held, and when it betrayed you. By 1840, he had crossed into Alabama's rough, red clay country, a landscape of pine, scrub oak, limestone pockets, and sudden sink depressions where the ground seemed to sag under its own memory. There, according to later testimony, Isaiah found what others had missed. Not open caverns large enough to live in, but a network of narrow voids, clay seams, and shallow chambers where cold air leaked upward at dawn. A Fisk researcher named Helen Carr, interviewing descendants in 1894, recorded a line she said came from an old woman whose mother had lived near the site. Isaiah would tap the ground with the back of a hatchet and listen to the answer. He said some earth was dead, and some earth was hollow. That detail matters, because Red Hollow was never described as a cave people simply stumbled into. It was made, expanded, lined, strengthened, hidden. The community that gathered around Isaiah seems to have started small. Escaped men first, then women, then children, then older people brought in under cover of rain and moonless nights. One damaged page attributed to Boone estimates perhaps 11 souls below by the close of 1841. A later source puts the number much higher. The most important document in the entire case did not surface until 1962, when a county road crew cut into a bank after heavy washout and uncovered a tar-sealed wooden chest. Inside was a journal so damaged that only portions could be read, but the surviving pages are widely believed to be Isaiah Reed's. The early entries are practical. Clay quality, vent holes, timber braces, drainage trenches. The language is careful, spare, almost technical. One entry dated February 3, 1842, reads, "South room held through 2 hard rains. Brick skin still dry behind. Need wider throat in the east draft, or smoke will settle low." That single line changes the story, because it tells us Red Hollow was not a rumor of people hiding under roots and blankets. It was engineered. Another entry, likely from late 1844, notes, "Children sleeping below the upper shelf now. Floor warmer than expected. Water runs clean after the second trap." There is also evidence of communal order. Food storage, watch rotations, quiet signals, light discipline. One damaged passage appears to describe instructions given to children on what to do if riders passed overhead while they were in the upper chambers. By 1848, Red Hollow may have housed more than 30 people, a number that returns so often in the record it is hard to ignore. 31. 31 names were never recovered, because no confirmed roster survives. But 31 appears in the journal. 31 appears in a later artifact count. And 31 appears in the most unnerving eyewitness account attached to the case. By the early 1850s, the settlement had become something more than a hidden refuge. It had structure, a rhythm, a system. One of Boone's final references to the place says, "They do not beg the world above for mercy. They have made another arrangement beneath it." That is a remarkable sentence, not only because it implies permanence, but because it hints at the deeper discomfort Red Hollow seems to have caused anyone who got close to the truth. A self-sufficient Maroon settlement was one thing. A self-sufficient Maroon settlement underground, built with skill, discipline, and enough secrecy to evade capture for years, was something harder for the official record to tolerate. And then came the summer of 1856. In June of that year, 3 white hunters moving through the ridge country reported finding a patch of disturbed red clay where the ground sounded wrong beneath their boots. One later claimed that a cool current of air had touched his ankles on an afternoon hot enough to buckle wagon iron. Another said he saw what looked like a straight seam in the earth, too straight to be natural, before one of the hounds began whining and refused to go farther. Their report reached county authorities, and from there, the matter changed shape. This was no longer a local curiosity. It became an investigation. On July 14, 1856, an 11-man party left Centerville for the ridge tract where Red Hollow was rumored to lie. The group included Sheriff Abel Mercer, 2 plantation representatives, a physician named Thomas Vale, 3 hired laborers, and several local men used to rough terrain. They were provisioned for 3 days. They returned on the 3rd night. Only 4 men came back under their own power. And according to every surviving account, none of them returned in a state that inspired confidence. Mercer's official statement, copied into a county packet later found with pages removed, claimed the party had discovered subterranean brickwork of unknown extent, accessed through a concealed opening beneath a clay overhang. He wrote that passages extended beyond expectation, supported by timber and hardened lining material, with side chambers showing evidence of recent human occupation. Then the report turns strange. Mercer notes repeated disorientation despite marked route, one laborer insisting he heard hammering farther below, and another swearing that the air changed direction inside the earth, as though the lower rooms were breathing. He does not mention recovering a single person. A private letter written 5 days later by expedition member Edwin Sloan is far less controlled. "I would prefer," he wrote to his brother in Mobile, to be thought a coward than to repeat plainly what we found under that hill. The passages were not collapsed. They were in use. We saw bedding, vessels, pegs for tools, a school slate, even a child's shoe. Yet the deeper we went, the less the place resembled concealment, and the more it resembled preparation. That is one of the most important lines in the case. Not concealment, preparation. Sloane also describes marks scored into sections of fired clay wall, not letters he recognized, not African motifs as one companion suggested, angular forms, set at intervals as if counting or warning. At some point during the descent, Thomas Vail became separated from the group. The timing is disputed. Mercer claimed it was only minutes. Sloane wrote it may have been close to an hour. When they found him again, he was kneeling in an unfinished side throat, with both hands pressed flat against the wall. He reportedly asked them why they had taken so long, because he had been listening to the people in the lower rooms. There were no people in the lower rooms. At least, none the others admitted seeing. The party withdrew in confusion before dawn. 3 men were left behind by necessity or panic. Even that part of the story is unstable. Some said they bolted in darkness. Others said a support gave way and cut them off. One version claims the men simply refused to come back toward the entrance after hearing something farther below. No recovery operation followed. Officially, the site was deemed too unstable. Unofficially, no one wanted to go down again. What happened afterward is where the case becomes truly grim. Thomas Vail was found hanging from a pine outside his brother's property on August 9th. The death was ruled self-destruction brought on by nervous collapse. A laborer named Joel Mercer, no relation to the sheriff, died less than 2 weeks later after waking repeatedly with the conviction that his lungs were filling with dust. His widow told a church deacon that he had clawed at his own throat and begged her not to let the red earth back in. Sheriff Abel Mercer resigned before September ended. He sold his horse, burned a trunk of papers in his yard according to one neighbor, and left the county. There is no verified record of where he went. And then, 6 years later, Nathaniel Boone died with mud-colored residue still visible on the cover of the ledger that mentioned Red Hollow more than once. But the darkest document of all is Isaiah Reed's journal. The later entries change in tone. They become less practical, less concerned with structure, more concerned with sound. One entry from November 1853 reads, "North wall answered tonight after the children were sleeping. Not a cave fall. Too regular." Another says, "Water in the lower catch tastes of salt again, though no salt should be here." Then a final legible line, written in a hand much sharper than the earlier pages. "It has learned the sound of our names." That sentence does not prove anything supernatural, but it does prove a shift. Something changed in Red Hollow before the expedition ever arrived, and from that point forward, the historical record becomes a trail of near discoveries and missing evidence. In 1947, a state geologist named Richard Bell surveyed a section of the same ridge system after a drought exposed unusual depressions. His field memo describes subsurface void patterning too regular for ordinary collapse, roughly 18 to 24 feet below grade. He also noted traces of fired material and compacted lining clay, not native to the immediate deposit layer. Bell requested a broader dig. It never happened. In 1955, an anthropologist from Howard University, Dr. Miriam Tate, began collecting references to underground freedom settlements in the Deep South. Her notes on Red Hollow are brief but striking. She wrote that local black families spoke of the place with reverence rather than superstition, and that the older ones rejected the language of haunting entirely. "They do not say the dead are there," she wrote. "They say the people went below where the ground was made ready." Tate's proposed site visit was canceled after funding was withdrawn for what her department called safety and access concerns. In 1958, a farm pond collapsed after heavy rain and opened a narrow shaft lined with hardened clay and brick fragments. County workers lowered a lamp and estimated the visible drop at more than 50 feet before the opening narrowed beyond view. At the bottom of the accessible section, they recovered a black wooden box. Inside were 31 carved pegs, each shaped loosely like a human figure. The wood was dense, almost oily, and could not be matched by the small lab that initially examined it. Then the box vanished into county custody. There is a receipt. There is a transfer slip. There is no surviving accession record at any museum, university, or courthouse archive. In 1964, historian Charles Dorsey published a short paper arguing that Red Hollow and similar cases mattered not because they proved folklore, but because they threatened a simpler national memory. A black-built underground settlement surviving for years beyond plantation control was not the story mid-century institutions were eager to center. Dorsey planned a larger work. A year later, he stopped speaking publicly about the subject. A former student later claimed Dorsey had received, through the mail, a scrap of paper showing concentric room outlines under a hill and a single sentence in faded pencil. "Not lost. Lower." The scrap was never found among his papers. There are also the local reports. Dry circular patches where animals refused to bed down. A tapping heard through the ground during cool spring nights. A seam of cold air rising from bare red soil after rain. Children warned not to stamp on certain ridges because somebody below might hear. Most of that can be dismissed, and some of it probably should be, but not all of it. Because in 1968, after violent storms cut a fresh gully through protected land south of the old survey tract, 2 highway workers reported seeing the corner of a brick arch exposed in the wash. Not a loose wall, not debris, an arch. They also described shallow geometric scoring along one side, repeated at measured intervals. The area was fenced off within 3 days. Access ended. No excavation report was ever released. So what was Red Hollow? The most conservative explanation is still a powerful one. Escaped enslaved people, led by a man with rare construction knowledge, found voids in unstable ground and turned them into a hidden settlement sophisticated enough to evade the world above for years. At some point, that settlement either became unsafe, was partially discovered, or collapsed under pressure from water, fear, and pursuit. Survivors fled. Evidence scattered. The rest was swallowed by time. That explanation fits a great deal. It does not fit everything. It does not explain why later witnesses kept describing prepared spaces rather than panic shelters. It does not explain the repeated references to lower chambers that seemed more important than the upper rooms used for living. It does not explain the salt. It does not explain why every serious attempt to gather the evidence seems to have ended with vanishing objects, withdrawn access, damaged files, or people abruptly deciding they had seen enough. And it does not explain the most persistent line in the oral record, that Isaiah Reed was not only building a refuge, he was building a way down. If that is true, then Red Hollow was never just a hiding place. It was a threshold. Maybe a practical one first, a survival machine built out of clay, heat, discipline, and desperate intelligence. But possibly, by the end, something else as well. And that is why the story still reaches people. Because beneath the dread, beneath the missing journals and broken reports, and whispered warnings, there is a harder truth pressing up through the case. Whoever built Red Hollow were not passive figures waiting for rescue by history. They were makers, planners, engineers of their own escape. If the official record blurred them, minimized them, or let their evidence disappear, that may be part of the horror too. Not that something impossible existed under the hill, but that something extraordinary did. A black-built underground town in the red clay of Alabama, a place the world above did not know how to explain without giving up too much of its own story. Maybe Red Hollow collapsed. Maybe the people scattered. Maybe the lower rooms were only lower rooms, and fear turned architecture into legend. Or maybe Isaiah Reed heard something real in the earth and followed it farther than anyone above was willing to go. Either way, 31 people entered the historical margin there and never truly came back out. And if the fragments are telling the truth, the hill did not keep them by accident. It kept them by design.